Hi, I'm James, and today we're going to do a retrospective review of the very first Twilight 2000 module, Free City of Krakow, and look at how well it ties in to the current version in the 4th edition Urban Operations. So let's start by having a look at it. Start with, we've got the lovely cover. Cover is by Steve Venters, and it set the standard really for Twilight 2000 artwork for the modules. Interior artwork is by, gotta make sure I get it right, yeah, Steve Venters and Liz Danforth. Liz seems to have done the character illustrations. Steve seems to have done the sort of the various bits to illustrate sort of the standard artwork. Now it's 44 pages long, so it's going to have a lot more in it than the current 4th edition, where we've got 2 pages plus a bit of on the militia and an event. There's going to be more with this. So I'm going to look at it in 2 ways. How it was when we first played it, and it was the first real campaign of Twilight 2000 I played in, and I'll always remember it. But I'm also going to look at it, how well you could use this, how well does it tie into the current edition. So let's start working through it. We've got always a good start, a contents page. I always like there to be a contents page, that just helps. It's scary to think that this came out in 1985. I do find that scary. So we've got the introduction. Now we've got adventure plots, things to actually get the characters to Krakow. We've got the killing ground, which is probably the one that most people will have come across. It's basically Sergeant Cutler. There's a name that has already cropped up a couple of times in the 4th edition. Has helped a bunch of marauders get hold of the reset papers. The scenario very much gives them the option of giving them to the players, and then now they've got the MacGuffin, everybody wants it. So in the current version you're probably not going to use that because we're still waiting for details on reset, but there's nothing to stop the coming across the ambush and coming across the name Cutler. You could start tying that straight in. You then go into actually getting into Krakow, and I like that they give you various sort of mini scenarios with 4 or 5 different options where you can change who that person is. So I'll give an example of the first one, a friendly stranger. Someone in faded military uniforms and civilian clothes mixed comes and sits with them, introduces himself in English, and basically tries to get friendly with them. And there's various options that it can be. It can be the owner of the Nezdrovia bar. It can be Sergeant Cutler, although he'll use a different name. It can be a Paul who's working for the KGB. I'm trying to sort of miss the names out there. It can actually be a sergeant in the guard, with a potential option for them. So that's friendly stranger. You've then got another one, loose lips, looking for work. They found us. So you've got 4 different adventure seeds there that you can start off with. Krakow is very much in the position of Casablanca in World War II. Anything can happen. It's sort of an uneasy neutrality, and there's a lot more spy type activity than out and out military in this. So you then got the description of the city. Now I did cross-reference this with the 4th edition version, and it does seem to match up. There's not huge discrepancies. I noticed that in the 4th edition trains occasionally leave with trade goods. That doesn't happen in this one. Do find it odd in the 4th edition when I was re-looking at it. It mentioned that most of the rails had been pulled up. So I'm not quite sure how the trains are leaving. Perhaps they're patrolled. That seems to be the stop the rails being stolen. One thing that this adds in is it adds the area around Krakow quite nicely. So you've got various places outside as well. Goes into that. You've got the 1st edition encounter tables. I think using the ones from the 4th edition would work possibly even better, I think, because there is more variety with them. You've got various maps, and the maps are a major plus with this. Goes into it in quite nice detail. There's odd little changes, but I don't think there's anything that you couldn't sort of really change. Either one works. For example, you've got the town hall is used more as a market in 4th edition, whereas here it's actually used sort of the government seat, whereas that's been moved a bit more in the 4th edition. To be honest, I didn't even pick up on that until I did a reading side by side. So you've got much more detail. I mean, even for example, and I'm going to massacre the pronunciation, the Wawel, which is the castle area, there's more on that in here than there is pretty much in the entire 4th edition, because it's a scale difference. There's 44 pages here, whereas that just has a couple. So, you know, I don't have a problem with that. I did find when I started reading up on some of the detail that they are slightly different. It felt that the 4th edition things were a bit better off. The fact that you could tie in the nuclear power plant adventure to it, whereas this version electricity is an absolute luxury here. So it's a little different. It's very much the 1st edition is you sell it to the players as this is a marvellous place. You know, I mean, the back describes it very interestingly. To the survivors of the US 5th Division, Krakow sounded like a city out of a fairy tale, an evil king, even a flying carpet. Krakow seemed an island of peace in a war-torn world. The reality was different. I like that. It sells it as it's a utopia, and then it starts to fade. Whereas the 4th edition, I think that fading isn't as obvious. I rather the 1st edition for that. But that is just a matter of taste. They all work fairly well. There's a bit more details on things like lodgings and finding abandoned buildings. The economy of Krakow is quite good because it looks at it and it brings in the concept of ration chits, where these are handed out to citizens and entitle them to food. Now, that's something that is sort of mentioned in the 4th edition but not elaborated on. Here we've actually got nearly a page on the economics specifically of Krakow, which I thought was quite good. Talks about what is produced, what's easier to find, what isn't. So not a lot different, just regard that as a bit more of an elaboration. Now this is where the big difference was. The who's who in Krakow. They're completely different. There's no crossover whatsoever. I have fond memories of this. You have the ruler, Kurt Zaber, who is slowly going mad under the strain of everything. You have him, and then you have the leader of the defence troops, General Bohuz Zahusku. And the tension as he wants to take over. That's still there in the new edition. The new edition has it as a democracy, which technically it is in this, but it has two different democratic or at least seemingly democratic characters. I won't put a spoiler in there, but I do like the touch that they link part of the background in 4th edition into Baron Zarni, who we're going to meet from Warsaw. I'm looking forward to going back to Warsaw. That makes it quite different. The big campaign in Krakow in the 4th edition kicks off with the death of the current mayor. So there's a part of me that's actually thinking, you know what, I might try and run it with Bohuz Sahusku still in place and Kurt Zaber still in power. Kurt Zaber then dies for whatever reason, knowing some groups because the PCs have had something to do with it, but alternatively it could be of natural causes, it could be the plague, whatever you want to use. And that puts the situation into where we are in 4th edition. But you've also then got the extra aspect of Bohuz Sahusku wanting to make a play for power. That really increases the tension and the dynamics. So I think if I run it, that's how I'm going to play it. Kurt Zaber is an interesting character, watching that deterioration with him. If the players are going to make it a long-term base, it suddenly changes everything when he dies. So yeah, I think there's that. There's a lot more PCs, all with lovely Liz Danforth artwork. It's going to be embarrassing to admit this. It took me about 10-15 years before I noticed it was Liz Danforth, whose artwork I always liked on Tunnels and Trolls. It was only when I went back and went, oh yeah. So you have more detail on various sub-leaders in here. And Kurt Zaber's mistress, which is a very interesting subplot. Her wanting to get away with one of the bodyguards. Very nicely detailed NPCs. I'm just looking at how many there are. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different NPCs. All of which have got their own motives and things that players could come across. Some of them they may not realise what's going on behind the scenes. If you're playing this, please don't ever assume that people are who they appear to be. So we've got plenty of information there. More detail on the Nasdrovia, which is really a good intended base for the PCs. We've then got the pull-out map in the centre, which I like. It comes across very much as a tourist map that's been updated, which is ideal. You can copy it and give it to your players. You've also on the back of it got much more for the referee, the Ormo organisation. That was something that caused a bit of a problem, I think, for the 4th edition writers. The Ormo and the Elite Zomo were very, what's the word I want? Integral to the setting, but they were dissolved, I believe, or they wouldn't have been operating in the same way post-communist, which means that they've generally switched to having them as former members. Makes sense. And they basically renamed them as that. I think more for sarcasm than anything else. So we've got, like I said, we go through all the different NPCs, and you then got some organisations that are active. Factions in sort of 4th edition terms. So you've got the Raiders of Warsaw. I'm not going to try and pronounce them in Polish. That's the main marauder group in the area. Highly detailed, more detail than you get with 4th edition. It breaks it down to their ammunition caches, how many rounds are in each and so on. Just bear in mind that when you're doing that, 1st edition had roughly for small arms 3 shots, or 1 shot was 3 rounds of ammunition, so you might need to multiply them up a little bit. So you've got details of them. You've got the Rada, which is the city council or town government technically, and it goes into interacting with them mainly through coming to get your papers to become a citizen. Goes through it in a fair bit of depth. They're not really powerful characters because Kurt Zaber is very much not a tyrant, but a semi-tyrant, I think is how I'd like. Possibly the best way to describe it would be a democratic front on his government. You've then got the Ormo. Now this, I did spot a slight difference. It's been based around in this the 8th Polish Motor Rifle Division, whereas in the 4th edition it refers to them as the 6th. I'm probably more inclined to keep them as the 8th, just for sentimental value. It makes very little difference between the two. The implication in this is much more that the 8th has had enough of the war and becomes the de facto local militia, whereas it's much more an organic one in the 4th edition. I don't think there's any major difference there. It is interesting that the strength in this is about twice the strength of the 4th edition, so just bear that in mind when you look at the numbers. There's a lot of detail on there. It also breaks them down very well into how they're organised, down to the point where each individual type of squad is given, this is how they're laid out, this is their experience levels. So you've got a lot of detail there. It goes into detail about the anti-tank gun they've got, what artillery they have, what armour they have, what they've done to modify the armour, particularly the ones they're employing in static positions. So there's a lot of detail on that. You've then got the KGB, what their motives are, what's going on. And remember we said there's a lot of intelligence agencies operating here. So there's a lot more detail on this. So you've got the DIA, you've got the CIA, you've got one that you might have to perhaps look at, which are the partisans, sort of the anti-Soviet fighters. I suppose you could just use them as they are. It wouldn't take a lot of rewriting. They are there. You've also got the Zbiegi, which must have massacred. It can mean deserters, runaways, refugees. This puts a lot more emphasis on the refugees. And you've got the Robotniki. This is a bit glossed over, I thought, in 4th edition, but was very integral to the setting. It mentions them, particularly in terms of the election. But the Robotniki basically are people without skills who are earning their citizenship by indentured servitude. Those who survive it anyway. They are a very interesting group that you can play around with. The book hints that some of them may be close to revolt, so you've got all of that. You've then got the neighbourhood gangs, another couple of marauder groups, and then you've got a bit more on the gazetteer, the sort of the different towns around the area, what's going on with them. I mean, you've got what, 3 pages of that, which gives you a lot that you can actually send the players out to, which greatly enhances, to me, the Free City, because you're not going to get your players still. We're going on a mission to this place for this person. This is going off. We hear rumours of this. We go and investigate that. So you can actually put a lot more into that. You've then got extra rules for 1st edition, which aren't really going to translate much, which is the helicopters. Now, interestingly, they changed the helicopter from an MI-17, I thought it was an MI-8, which is what I said in the review, so my apologies for that, to an MI-24. So it does basically go through the rules for 1st edition, which, as you can imagine, were very complex, being 1st edition. Added some new weapon types in, 30mm cannons, Hellfires, AT6s and 7s, 2.75-inch rockets, 57mm rockets, Stingers, Sidewinders, SA-14s. They were all added in, and there were statistics for the MI-17H HIP, the MI-27E, the the MI-28, the OH-58, UH-60 and the AH-64. So that was useful if you were playing that in first edition, and then that was expanded on in a fair bit of depth in Challenge magazine. So you've got all of that, and at the back then you've got a glossary, which is quite useful, because if you come across a name of a town, you can glance at it, and it tells you where it is, and a little bit of detail, a sentence at most. And some of the terms, such as the Zbiegi, that one's mentioned in that, Robotniki, things like that. So it was a really good book. I mean, I've still got my copy from 1985. I bought it pretty much when it came out. I didn't actually read it for probably a good year, because my friend was actually running the campaign, so I had it sat there, and then we moved on to the moved up the Vistula to Warsaw, and that I ran that bit, which, looking back, was an interesting way to run a campaign. But with it, when I read it, it was a wow. This is in depth. I think the big difference between Free League and GDW. Free League are a role-playing game company. They will gloss over the military detail. GDW were a war games company primarily, and they really went for the nitty-gritty. Like I said, you can, for example, open it up and see that. Let's use an example. The regular mortar squad of the Ormo has a veteran and experienced 3 novices. Excuse me. With 1 AK-74, 4 Makarovs and 1 Vasilek 82mm mortar. You don't get that sort of detail in Free League, for good or bad. I am somebody who knows a lot about the military technology, so tends to go, yeah, that's useful. It has the odd error. I mean, we have to remember this was written in 1985, pre-internet, pre-Glasnost and Perestroika. So things like the, ironically, a mistake that was carried over to 4th edition, the RPG 16, which was only used briefly by the airborne forces, is sort of regarded as quite a common anti-tank weapon. So that's the big difference between the two. Running it for 4th edition, you could run it straight as is, I think, without any difference. It depends how you see the politics of it going off. I think I'm going to, like I say, I'm going to combine the two. I think that is a really good change of pace in the campaign. You've gone from an authoritarian government, which is doing its best for the people, I think, in many ways, to suddenly you've got an election. That's a massive change of pace, which is going to result in the players having to do more with it. There's more detail in this which I can then exploit. There's more NPCs that we can pick up on. So it's a useful book. You can pick it up on DriveThru RPG. I'll put a link in the description. Please order it if you do get it through the link, because then DriveThru RPG gives me a little bit of money, which I can then use to buy more things for review. And have fun there. I hope you have as much fun as I did playing it. It's still, from the distance of coming up to 40 years, a well-written scenario. It doesn't make concessions to ease of play. You will have to look at this and plot a lot yourself, but from the perspective of a setting, it's long term. It's not something the players will drive through. You're going to be sat here for a while. And let me know what you think of it. Let me know of your experiences when you played it. Let me know what your new experiences are of it, and what you think of the difference between the 2 editions versions of Krakow. Which one do you prefer? Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please click on the like button below so that I know what people like and I know what to make more of. Alternatively, if you've enjoyed it and think you'd like to see more, please click on the subscribe button. That way you get notified by YouTube whenever I bring out a new video, and you never know, there might be something in there that you hadn't considered, because I do cover a variety of things on the channel. And finally, if you have a little bit of cash going, I now have a Patreon account. I'm always looking for patrons, because at the end of the day, let's be perfectly honest, it's a good way for me to get a little bit of money that I'll use to buy review items or to travel to museums and so on. I don't put a huge amount on that. At the minute, all we've got is one tier charging £1 a month, which just, as I say, helps cover my costs. See you soon.